September 28, 1994, Baltic Sea. 852 people died, 760 stayed buried in the sea. MS Estonia sunk in few minutes. How is this possible? Instead of doing proper investigation, what we have is what seems like a biased conclusion that there was a ship malfunction. The ship itself is unapproachable, and now we are left with conspiracies like weapon smuggling and attacks. Hello my friends, so welcome back to my channel. I'm not gonna have a long intro. In short, if you like my channel, if you like the topics that I'm talking about on my channel, then make sure that you have subscribed, make sure you press the like under this video and any other videos. Also leave a comment because this really helps to promote my channel a little bit further in this YouTube algorithm. But if you would like to support me a little bit like financially, which is also very welcome but not obligatory, there's a link to my Patreon. You can follow that link and subscribe to some of the tiers that I have created on my Patreon. That being said, thank you so much for being with me today, and let's dive into today's topic because there's literally a lot to cover. Today I will be diving into one of the most disastrous and craziest accidents in the Baltic Sea. It's the sinking of the ship MS Estonia. No real explanation of what really happened with the ship has been provided. Well, there is an official version, which is basically technical, but there are still many additional questions that really do not justify that final kind of official version. This, in turn, this secrecy created some additional conspiracies around this disaster, starting from technical problems, ending with secret government missions. This story is going to be mind-blowing, and I think not so many people are actually aware of the conspiracies that are surrounding this MS Estonia disaster, and I think we should talk about it more. Also, what is interesting that all of these conspiracies continue to live because nobody is actually allowed to kind of debunk them, because the ship at the moment, for like quite a while already, is unapproachable. It's lying there at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, and legally many countries cannot even approach it because it's an official graveyard. So what are they hiding? Why they do not want to put a full stop to this story? All of this in today's episode. September 27th, year 1994, Tallinn, the capital city of Estonia. It was a beautiful, clear day. There was a lot of sunshine and there was no sign that something really bad is about to happen. The ship looked astonishing. It was 150 meters long. It looked spectacular, and Estonians were really proud of it. Not only because it looked spectacular, as I said, but also it was like a symbol of breaking out of the previous chains of the Soviet Union. It was a symbol of technical development, something that's symbolizing Estonia at the moment. Although, as I said, the day seemed peaceful and nice and sunny, a crazy storm was approaching. It was forecasted to be around 21 meters per second, and of course the passengers were informed about that, and of course the crew also knew about that. The ship left the port of Tallinn at 7:15 p.m., which was a little bit later than it was scheduled, and this will also be crucial. We will discuss it also a little bit later in the video. But the trip was supposed to end in Stockholm on the next day, September 28th. And the trip all in all would take 15 hours and 15 minutes. As soon as the ship left the Tallinn port, they were out in the open sea, and immediately the trip started to become a little bit rocky. Hence the warnings about the storm. Some of the passengers, like Rolf Surman, did not sleep. He was hanging out with colleagues at the karaoke bar. He remembers that the ship was rocking so much that it was impossible to sit on bar stools. Around midnight, according to the passengers, two loud bangs were heard on the ship. Some of the passengers even said that it felt like the ship was going through some kind of ice, that kind of sound. MS Estonia immediately started to tilt sidewards, and people were woken up because they were basically falling out from their beds in the cabins, and it was also difficult to walk because the tilt was just going down and down. Once the ship started to tilt, it didn't bounce back, it just continued to go down and down. Yasmina, at that time a young Christian girl who was on MS Estonia as part of her Bible school trip, was staying at the lower deck cabin under the deck where all the cars and trucks were parked. That was the cheapest level. After the bangs that were heard on the ship, Yasmina saw water coming in. People who were spending that night in the bars or karaoke bars, like one of the passengers I mentioned, his name was Rolf, said that all the bottles and glasses were starting to slide off the shelves and the tables and were just crashing on the floor. In tax-free shops, all the contents of the shelves were also falling on the floor. Of course, the passengers started to panic. They felt like they immediately needed to leave the ship, or at least get up to the upper deck to see what is really happening. And this is also the moment when the alarm goes off, signifying that something crazy really is happening there. A message from MS Estonia was sent to the close by ships. Their names was Europa and Mariella, and it said, I quote,
Silja Europa, Viking, Estonia, 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 Mayday, Mayday, Estonia, Silja Europa, are you calling Mayday? Estonia, what's going on? Can you reply? Yes, we have a problem here. We have a bad listing on the right side, I believe over 20 to 30 degrees. Can you come to assistance and also ask Viking Line to help? Yes, the Viking Line is behind us and probably got the information. Can you give me your position? We're having a blackout. I don't know. I can't tell you. Okay, all right. We'll take actions.
Meanwhile, the tilting continued and the things around became basically like a hell, but people still were trying to get out of their cabins or wherever they were to the exits. Some of them helped other people, some didn't care, some were just staying there, frozen from the shock, thinking maybe this will end at one moment, maybe this is just a nightmare. And then suddenly the lights went off. Everything became pitch black. And this is the moment when MS Estonia sends the last message to MS Europa saying,
Are you coming to rescue us? It's looking really bad right now.
It was clear that they're gonna end up in the cold waters of the Baltic Sea. It was impossible to take out the lifeboats because all of them basically were under the water already. And then the ship already reached a horizontal position, and one side of the ship basically became the floor for the passengers who were still holding on to their lives on the ship. MS Europa, that was the only ship in contact with MS Estonia, tried to figure out MS Estonia's location since they didn't get it, and they reached out to another nearby ship called Mariella, asking maybe they are seeing MS Estonia and they are aware of their location. The reply was a no, but they did see a red rocket flare and said they will go to that direction. They had an echo on the radar about 5 miles south from them, so they decided to head that direction. As I said, it was storm on that night, and the people who are still holding on to the tilted ship were also hit by huge cold waves coming from the Baltic Sea. But at that point, the captain sounded the horn, which meant that everybody had to leave the ship immediately. And this meant they had to jump into the cold waters of the Baltic Sea now. Simply life vests on them. So they jumped into the water and started to float there. Some of the lifeboats did manage to come from below of the ship, so some people did have a chance to crawl on them and save them. The ship at that point was slowly disappearing under the sea, and people were looking at this happening, floating in the sea, or some of them in the lifeboats. And some of the people, which is the saddest part, were still inside in the ship, and they were going down together with it. The rescue ships who figured out the Estonia's location started to appear on the horizon, and people were like, yes, we're gonna make it. We are now saved. So they're seeing these ships coming in, but they're just basically standing there drifting and looking at those poor people in the cold waters of the sea. But nothing's happening. Nobody's being saved. Why? The conversation between MS Mariella and MS Europa, one of the ships who had arrived to rescue these people, showed that basically these ships could not do anything. They were scared that once they will approach these people in the sea or even the lifeboats, they would risk killing them with their ship's propellers and basically make mincemeat out of that. So what they decided instead was just to wait for other rescue decisions, and some of the ships also threw out some extra lifeboats so that people who are in the waters could climb on them and at least don't stay inside these ice cold waters. So what is happening is that basically there are ships who are ready to take on these people, but technically they cannot actually perform that. Meanwhile, Finnish Maritime Rescue Coordination Center reported sending out rescue helicopter from Turku. 2 additional helicopters were organized from Sweden. All in all, there were 6 to 7 helicopters brought in. So the plan was basically that the helicopters would pick up the people from the sea and place them on these ships, and in this way they would rescue them. And also other ships in the surrounding area announced their preparedness to receive any victims that were saved from the sea by helicopters on their ships. So that was the plan, how they were about to carry out this rescue operation. People had to stay in these cold waters or in their rafts, wherever anyone was, for 6.5 hours. This operation was not a quick one. And besides, as I said, there was a huge storm. The waves were around 6 to 7 meters high. And once they would hit the rafts, some of the people were basically flushed out of those rafts and never came back. So they basically died in that way while waiting for the help to arrive. All of them basically were soaked in cold water, the ones who were inside the water, of course, and also the ones inside the raft, because the waves were constantly hitting the rafts. And some of them were just wearing underwear because they were taking out from their beds once this accident started to happen on MS Estonia. This is why when helicopters arrived to pick up people from some of the rafts in the sea, they were sometimes already empty, or there was people, but they were not alive anymore. Some of them had frozen, some of them given up. Injured, dead or alive, all of them were sent to the closer by hospitals to receive help. Mental help, also physical help, of course. The helicopters were working non-stop even on the next day when they were basically going after just dead bodies in the sea. There were 989 people on MS Estonia and only 137 survived. 852 died, most of them still under the sea. Needless to say, this was a huge disaster that ruined families, people's lives. Governments had to react, and their relatives of the deceased waited for some answers, explanations of what had happened. Swedish Prime Minister of that time, Carl Bildt, arrived in Turku, Finland, to meet Finnish Prime Minister Esko Aho and Estonia's Prime Minister Mart Laar. The goal was to discuss the rescue operation of MS Estonia. All of the prime ministers would give interviews, and there was an official press conference, and they would say that they are really invested into investigation process of MS Estonia disaster, and they are also very invested into preventing something like this happening in the future. The speculation of what really happened was that the bow visor was not properly closed, and this is when the water started to come in. At least that was the first theory that the officials started to quite actively push forward. An accident investigation committee was created to look into this case, assess what happened, who is to blame, and this committee, let me tell you, wow. and we will get to that a little bit further in the video, so stay tuned. What is interesting, and remember this, is that the government representatives, they were actively at the beginning talking about investigating it properly, also taking out the dead bodies so that the relatives can properly bury them and mourn them. Also, they were talking about taking out the ship from the bottom of the sea so that it's easier to investigate. Yeah, as I said, remember this, because this will change pretty quickly. Around a week passed and the narrative changed immediately. So what you have to understand is that during that time there was a change in Swedish government. So the prime minister, who was at the beginning giving the interviews and saying that yes, we will take out the bodies and we will take out the ship and we will make sure that people can bury their relatives properly. Yeah, when the new prime minister came into power, the narrative completely changed and they took a completely different approach to this case. So this new prime minister elects a person who will now be responsible with dealing with these MS Estonia things and the investigation. So, and this person that he chooses is the Minister of Communications, a woman named Ines Uusmann, and her first statements that she gave for the press in regards to solving MS Estonia case were quite interesting, let me say like that, and they set a completely different tone to how things are going to be solved here. And on a TV interview she said, "It takes about 28 days from leaving the water surface until you are down with the pressure chamber to equalize the pressure." With this statement she's basically saying that people have to understand that it's very dangerous to go down there where the ship is lying at the moment, and it's such a complicated operation, and it would be even almost impossible for the divers to do that. So impossible operation, we shouldn't risk the people. That was the narrative that she was pushing forward. But was it really like that? Was it really that impossible? Was it really so dangerous for divers to go down there? Another question is that who is this Ines Uusmann and why is she making these announcements in relation to diving and maritime questions? Is she really an expert? Well, in fact, she was no expert at all. Her opinions and her statements were very much dependent from the opinions that were made by the officials of the Swedish Maritime Administration. So she was basically saying what she was told to say. And together with Miss Uusmann there was always Chief Legal Officer at the Swedish Maritime Administration. His name was Johan Fransson, who in many ways kind of shifted the investigation process towards a completely different direction of not taking the ship and bodies out at all. So this guy was elected by the government as an expert to assess the situation and come out with the results about whether it's possible to take out the wreck and whether it's possible to rescue the dead who are still down there in the sea. It takes him about a week to do this research and come out with the results, basically stating a lot of things that are not in favor of touching the wreck and saving the bodies that are still there in the sea.
In view of the fact that the ship is at a great depth and taking into account that the ship has a fairly large weight, it is of course, from the technical point of view, an extraordinary demanding task.
He said that diving down to see what's down there with MS Estonia is super duper risky for the divers because they can get stuck there, and also he said that there's like a lot of crushed glass down there and they can cut themselves. So there was like a lot of points, but the main thing about this report was that we shouldn't go down there. Of course, this was not satisfactory for the families and the relatives because they wanted them to investigate. They wanted the answers, and they also wanted to bury their loved ones properly. Families of the deceased, of course, kind of pointed out that the Prime Minister of Sweden at that time promised that he's gonna do that. He's gonna save the bodies. He's gonna go down there and he's gonna investigate. He's gonna take out the ship. But they even went out to have some protests, but none of this actually gave any results. because this was already another prime minister and he had a completely different idea about how things should be solved here. Now, in the year 1994, a little bit after the disaster, the government did kind of order a little kind of dive-in nearby the Estonia ship. And it really looked like something on a checklist that they had to do just to prove the point that no investigation is needed and it's dangerous to take out the ship. So they hired a project called Rockwater, and they sent down there to MS Estonia some professional divers. The task of Rockwater divers was basically just to evaluate the situation of the ship and how dangerous it would be to take out it. One of the divers assigned to this task later on in an interview came out and said that the depth actually wasn't that deep. It was like 85 meters, and any professional free diver can actually do that kind of distance by just simply holding their breath. So it wasn't as crazy as it was said on those TV interviews by Miss Usman. The divers had a very good visibility down there by the shipwreck, and they said that the ship's keel was flawless, and afterwards they went into some of the cabins of the ship. And once they did that, of course, they started to encounter dead bodies. But the thing about this operation, there is this one strange thing. The divers did not have any liberty within the framework of this operation. Basically, they were just following the orders from officials who were like up on the ship. So they were saying which places the divers should go, which places they should explore and investigate. So the divers couldn't actually go where they wanted to go and where they wanted to film and explore. Being the experts and probably knowing better, but yeah, that's basically what happened. They were just following the directions of the officials who were conducting this, let's say, parade. They might as well know something more and just tell the divers to go to places that are more safe, where there are no evidences of something else, and like point out to the places where it's safer to film and photograph. Because in some other areas there might be something more that should not be filmed and photographed. That's one of the conspiracy beginnings, but we will get to that. Anyway, one of the divers who was into this operation said that the only thing that was in his mind while he was on this mission was why nobody wants to take out these dead bodies so that they are properly buried, because they were still in a good condition. You could still recognize and identify them at this point when this mission was carried out. So why nobody wants to do that? But nobody during this operation asked actually to take out, recover at least one body from the wreck. All they said was just leave them and go on and investigate further. So at the end of this Rockwater operation, what was concluded is that the bodies could be taken out because it's not that deep. They're still in good condition. They can be identified, and this kind of operation can be actually carried out. The diver team located 125 victims and documented them in their reports. They would have done more because they knew there were 852 deaths on the ship, but they were not asked to do that. In addition, the Rockwater team reported that, in their opinion, the ship can be salvaged at that moment. It could be complicated, but not impossible. This report from the Rockwater was given to Swedish Prime Minister Ingvar Carlsson, and in the December of the same year he comes out with an official announcement and report in regards to salvaging MS Estonia. And I quote,
There are practical problems and ethical issues, but there are also wishes of individuals, relatives who each in their own way mourn their loved ones. Therefore, there is no reason to delay a decision. The Swedish government's decision is that the passenger ferry MS Estonia with the dead will remain at the sea.
It seems like the Rockwater operation was just a technicality, like a tick on a to-do list, because they had already decided that they're not going to salvage the ship and they're not going to take out the bodies from the bottom of the sea. And of course, again, the families and the people who lost somebody on that ship were not happy about this government's decision. What is interesting to know about this Rockwater operation is that they were also asked to send down a specific robot that can navigate through the wreck. And this robot was supposed to film the ship's condition. And we still, up to nowadays, do not know how much did the robot film of the ship. So all of the materials that were filmed by this robot, they have somehow disappeared, or they are very well hidden somewhere. At the final report, at the end of all of this investigation in regards to MS Estonia, we will get to that, it is mentioned that the wreck has been examined, assuming that probably they are talking about the material that was filmed by this robot. But the thing is that this report is not actually supported by any kind of documentation or materials supporting the statement that the wreck has been examined. Suspicious. But with this, the spectacle of the oddities did not end. The Swedish government then decided to announce that the wreck of MS Estonia will become a graveyard, basically, and I quote, to ensure the place of the grave is respected. And then they announced that the ship is going to be covered with concrete, and this is done to avoid grave looting. And then there is this thing, the Estonia Agreement of 1995, a treaty among Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Denmark, Russia, and the United Kingdom. And it declared sanctity over the site, prohibiting their citizens from even approaching the wreck. However, there is a loop. The treaty is only binding to signatory countries. Therefore, the Swedish Navy has come across many diving operations in the area since then, and we will talk about that a little bit later also. And this is why the area is always monitored by Finnish Navy radar. After this decision, of course, there was again a riot from the relatives of the dead, and a special meeting between the government and the relatives was created. And in that meeting, the government representatives asked the relatives to respect their decision. In turn, the relatives asked the government representatives, but how about respecting the deceased? Is that a respect if you just cover them with the concrete? I think that's a fair enough question. And then MS Estonia was partially buried in concrete. Is this a normal solution? In my opinion, no. And I do believe that you are also in the same boat with me in that. I think it was an attempt to hide something. At least it gives a reason for us to think that they're trying to hide something. And yes, they did push forward the idea that the bow visor was malfunctioning. But if you follow the laws of physics, the ship should have capsized in that situation. Let me just explain. So when bow visor falls off, the water enters the ship through the open deck. When ships capsize quickly, air pockets arise, and this creates boat buoyancy. The ship in this case should have ended up in an upscale down position, like a buoy, and then they can stay afloat for a long time because of the air pocket on the top. But this did not happen. The ship sank very quickly, in less than an hour, and it did not stay afloat as it should have been if it was the question of bow visor. So what really happened? And this is why people started to look into this case and started to speculate that maybe there were more openings than just this bow visor. Well, the bow visor level is the level where the cars and trucks are parked on the ship, but under that level there was another level for the cheapest cabins for the people. And in those cabins, there was also one of the survivors that I already mentioned, the Christian girl Yasmin. So she was basically sleeping there. And when the ship started to sink and the craziness started to happen, she went out of her cabin and she saw that the water was coming in down there. So basically, the water was also coming in that lower level, below the bow visor level. So this means that there should probably also be some kind of hole where it was also leaking below that level. Something is not sticking there. So the bow visor did break off, but that was not the only problem. That is what people are speculating about now. So as I said, the Special Investigation Committee was created, and the official name of it was Joint Accident Investigation Commission. And as we already know, it was created to investigate this MS Estonia disaster. And on November of the 18th, 1994, they came across with a new evidence. Basically, the bow visor suddenly appeared in the waters of the sea. And when they inspected this bow visor, it can be clearly seen that it had suffered a lot of damage. It could be concluded that the force that knocked it off must have been huge. The bow visor was found around 2 kilometers away from the wreck. This meant that the ship turned around after it had come off. This creates a buzz in the media. All the titles of the newspapers were writing about this bow visor that was now found, and the investigation committee promises that they're going to do a thorough investigation of it so that they can come out with precise conclusions about what and how looks and what and how had happened there. It took them 3 years to come out with this official, let's say, report after this investigation of this bow visor. And this result says the same. Yes, the bow visor was to blame. So why did it take them 3 years to say the same thing they said before? And what is more interesting is that when they came out with this result announcement of this research of the bow visor, they didn't even consider other survivors' testimonies, circumstances that would contradict with this bow visor theory. In fact, I watched a very good docuseries. I will link them below, and I totally suggest you watch them if you're interested into this case. It's very detailed. And the survivors who talked in the interviews, they said that they were not even approached by the representatives of this investigation committee, but these are the peoples who were actually there on that ship when this happened. Their testimonies are the best sources ever. They were there, so why nobody even attempted to talk to them? Yes, some of them did say that after MS Estonia sank, they were reached out by Swedish police to give some testimonies, but there was no follow-up. No follow-up from the investigation committee, which would be the logic way how things should be carried out. And when they read the report, the official report by this committee, they understood that many things were misinterpreted or put in a different light, that actually things were happening on MS Estonia on that night. And the only testimonies that were considered while carrying out this investigation by this committee were the crew members who had survived. And when I say misinterpreted, I mean big time mistakes. For example, the survivors said that they heard the first loud bang on the ship around midnight, but in the report it says that this happened 14 minutes later. And in investigations like this is a big deal. This is a big mistake. It's 14 minutes. So some of the survivors came together to kind of remember how the things were happening on MS Estonia and created their own timeline. And basically what they realized is that their timeline, the people who are actually there and felt it on their own skin, is totally different from that is kind of pushed forward in this official report of this official investigation committee. So what these people did, they reached out to authorities. They wrote an official letter saying that there are a lot of mistakes in the timeline in the report, and they have created their own timeline, and they are very, very welcome to share their testimonies again and correct this mistake. This letter was signed by 34 survivors, and they were asking to this investigation committee or the authorities, whoever, to reopen this case and do everything again, to investigate it again properly this time. This official letter was never responded, not by this committee, not by anyone else in the government. And the chairman of this committee, his name was Uno Laur, said, "Everything can be criticized, everyone can criticize." That's a quote from him. And I guess by this, he wanted to tell to all of the survivors, fuck off, we're not gonna change anything. And by saying everyone, this is not everyone. These are people who went through hell and survived and are ready to tell the real story. What a disrespect. Jutta Rabe, a German journalist from Spiegel TV, also felt that there is something weird happening with this investigation carried out by this committee. So she decided to kind of jump on this train and kind of try to figure out everything by herself. And she interviewed two witnesses, two of the crew members who had survived, and they were also participating in this official press conference, the initial press conference. And those guys were Henrik Silaste and Tanel Mosar. They were technicians from Estonia, and basically their job was actually to check on the area where also the Bowwiser was located. So Rabe asked them what did they see while they were still in the control room of MS Estonia, because their job was to check also on the video translation that was showing exactly the Bowwiser. So what you have to understand is that these guys stayed in the control room and checked on the Bowwiser up until the moment when the ship still reached 90 degrees, and then they left the area because it was not safe for them and they wanted to save themselves. And they said that throughout all of this time up until the moment that they left, they saw on the screen that the Bowwiser was not open. They did tell that they saw that there was quite a decent amount of water coming from the sides, but it was not coming from the Bowwiser or because it was open. So maybe this signifies that even though the Bowwiser went off, it was not the main problem, that the water was coming from some other things that had happened on the ship before. Now, MS Estonia was built in Germany in a shipyard called Meyer, and of course, when the official conclusion is that the Bowwiser is to blame, this immediately means that the shipmakers are to be blamed because they have made a ship whose Bowwiser is now to blame for this disaster. And what they did, they created their own independent investigation. They invited captains, maritime experts, anyone who is into this kind of maritime topic. And they really carried out a very thorough investigation independently from that what was done by Swedish government. And they did it because they also wanted to protect themselves, because they have been made some kind of bad shipmakers, but they did not believe that that's the truth. So they did proper calculations. They also invited all the people who survived and collected their testimonies. They also carried about the testimonies from the people who were below the car deck. So they wanted to see the whole picture. They wanted to come out with their results and say that no, it was not us who were to blame. So what they're saying is that there was a hole on one side of the ship that is below the car deck, and this is also why the ship tilted towards one side so fast. And then the puzzle of why the ship sank in the way it did seems solved. This is why it did not capsize. And remember this and watch further. Another theory that the shipyard called Meyer pushed forward together with this theory about another hole below the car deck is that probably this hole was created by some kind of explosives, meaning somebody brought some explosives on board and detonated them while MS Estonia was on the way on its trip in the Baltic Sea. And this, of course, was received by the mass media, and it went so viral all over the news, all over the newspapers. And this could be a very good reason for another kind of investigation to make sure that this second hole doesn't exist, whether it has been created by explosives or not. But remember, there was this treaty, this agreement from 1995, which basically makes MS Estonia location a graveyard, which means that none of these countries who have signed the agreement cannot approach this graveyard and cannot actually go down and check if the second hole exists. How convenient. But of course, the pressure to reopen this investigation existed, both from the relatives and also just from the public, because they were now invested, they were now interested. And Uno Laur, again, this guy who was the chairman of this investigation committee, says that no, their investigation's conclusion is the final. It was the Boweiser and Mayer's investigation's conclusion about the possible second hole and explosives do not deserve to be taken seriously. And that was a quote. And they announced that the committee's conclusion from 1994 is the final and will not change. In the year 2000, a conference is carried out in Stockholm. Basically, it was created by the relatives of the deceased, so they're discussing the topics in regards to MS Estonia. And another man from the US is present there. His name is Greg Bemis. He's basically a professional. He owns companies that are dealing with ocean engineering, and he owns robots that actually go down in the seas and investigate shipwrecks. So he offers his help because he's now at this point also invested, and he wants to get the answers in regards to MS Estonia, and he wants to know if this second hole actually exists. So what he does, he goes on this trip with his ship, with all of his equipment to the place where MS Estonia is located. Immediately, he's surrounded by Swedish and Finnish Coast Guards suggesting him kindly to leave this place because this is a graveyard. And by being there and planning to dive there, he's violating the Swedish law. And again, we're back to that very convenient agreement between the Baltic countries and the other countries who signed it. But Mr. Bemis here, he is a US citizen, so technically he can't do that because he's not part of that agreement. And the Coast Guard has the guts to come on his ship and threaten him in front of cameras, because this was filmed, and say that, okay, you can do that, you can go down there with your robot, but if you come to Sweden or your family or relatives come to Sweden, there will be consequences and police will be involved. How bold. So Mr. Bemis launches down his robot, films the wreck, and what he sees there is some signs of the second hole. It was not conclusive because it was a little bit covered with the sand and the concrete thing that was put down there, but still there is a little clue that might be additional hole in the area where the Mayer shipyard said it might be. So he comes out with this result, and of course this is given to the committee, and the committee says that this is a scam, it's falsified, it's not true, there is no second hole again. They're just gaslighting everything. And now let's move on to the spiciest part of this mysterious disaster of MS Estonia. Stephen Davis, he was a journalist from New Zealand, and he has been doing research on MS Estonia disaster for 21 years, and he is certain that MS Estonia was part of a smuggling operation. Namely, it was a smuggling operation where some Russian secrets were smuggled to the West. And this could be also the reason why MS Estonia suffered this disaster. More specifically, Mr. Davis said that this smuggling operation, or let's say operations that took place on MS Estonia, were coordinated together by MI6, which is the United Kingdom intelligence, Estonian and also Swedish intelligence. What is more, there were some sources saying that Russians knew about it and warned them to stop. So, Mr. Davis, he had some connections in MI6. His source was an active MI6 agent, and he said that the first warning actually came from Russia through diplomatic channels in the year 1993, and it was basically ignored by Estonian government. The second one came a little bit before MS Estonia's disaster. And that one went straight to MI6, and that was a little bit like threatening, because that said, if you don't stop, there will be consequences. So what Mr. Davis said, that after investigating this case for many, many years, he knew that the first red flag was the fact that they immediately wanted to cover up the ship with the concrete, so to hide something that's on the ship. And secondly, he said that the treaty is another very big red flag. So the treaty or the agreement was supposed to be signed by the Baltic nations, which would be the ones surrounding the Baltic Sea: Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Russia, Finland, Sweden, Germany. By the way, Germany did not sign it. But for some kind of weird reason, there's also a signature of UK. It's not a Baltic nation and has no relation to the Baltic Sea. So why did British government thought it's necessary for them to put their signature on this agreement, which is totally like unrelated to this case? Well, this brings us to another man, which is another of Davis's sources, an ex-MI6 spy named Richard Tomlinson. And Davis had an interview with Tomlinson. And during this interview, Tomlinson gives him a document asking, did you know that this happened to MS Estonia? And according to Mr. Davis, this document basically proves the involvement of UK's intelligence into smuggling operations that were happening on MS Estonia, not only on that night, but also before. So this would explain why UK signed this agreement, because they are also interested in covering up the things that they were doing on that ship. But of course, I haven't seen the document. This is what this journalist is saying he received from this former MI6 agent. But still, just keep listening. I think even without that document, we can conclude that this smuggling was taking actually place. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in the year 1991, there were still lots of Soviet military bases around ex-USSR states that needed to be wrapped up. This means there were still lots of Soviet weapons and equipment that, instead of destroying, could be acquired by someone. It appears that one of the countries that was most interested in getting these weapons and secrets, and I don't know what was left after the Soviet Union, was Sweden. And Estonia, who had just gained their independence from USSR, was very much determined to keep their independence further, and was like looking for some friends who could help them to maintain their independence. They were even considering making Estonian intelligence. So then they decided that probably it would be wise to knock on the door of MI6 and ask for some help and assistance. MI6 at that time already had a very good relationship with Sweden, so everything came together. The plan was clear. So from Russia, that has a border with Estonia, they were smuggling in some of the military equipment or Russian military secrets. All of this was placed on MS Estonia, and from there, this would go to Sweden, and Sweden gets their weapons or those USSR secrets that they were really, really eager to get. According to Davis, this kind of smuggling was taking place for several years, and it was very successful until MS Estonia sunk. And this is when the rumor started that there were some government-placed military equipment on the ship, and that they are really trying to hide the real reason of the MS Estonia disaster. Partially also because if you will investigate what's down there, you will find that there's also some smuggled military equipment on board. So there was this guy, his name was Lennart Henriksson. 10 years he comes out with his interview where he says that he was working in Estonia's port in the customs. And one day he was called in by his boss and he said, I quote, "There will be cars coming in that you will let in without inspecting." So when Leonard asked whose order is this, the boss simply said that this is an order from above, from very, very high ranked people. So this meant that he had to simply ignore those cars and just let them through. Was this conversation about some cars smuggling in Russian equipment? We don't know, but he did remember that the first cars that he had to let through without real inspecting came in around 2 weeks before MS Estonia disaster. So the logic here is that if these things were smuggled 2 weeks before MS Estonia sank, there can be a high possibility that this was also happening on the night when MS Estonia sank. It took 10 years for the armed forces to come out clean, confirming the rumor is true. There was military equipment on board of MS Estonia. An official gives an interview on the news saying with a big poker face, I quote, "The armed forces conduct activities that are partially secret. It is natural that we have such activities. This is part of such activity and I cannot comment on it." This, my friends, is shocking. Transporting military equipment, first of all, requires completely another set of safety rules, but they still place it on a civilian ship where there's a lot of passengers and risk their lives, and don't even bother to tell them that they're on a ship where there is military equipment. Once again, people are pissed. They again asking for a new investigation because these facts, they change a lot. Not only that Mayer investigation that suggested there might be another hole, then also this one. Military equipment smuggling and possible threats from Russia to stop it, which endangers all of the passengers on board on that night. But in regards to those smuggling operations that happened before MS Estonia sank, Swedish government did come out with an announcement saying that yes, there were some operations on those days when that customs guy said, this Mr. Leonard. But they said that it happened on those days when Leonard said they happened, when he had to let them go without checking as part of customs. But they said that nothing was smuggled on that night when MS Estonia sunk, which was very convenient because Leonard was not working on that day. And none of the other employees actually came forward with saying that they saw some of the cars going on MS Estonia. How convenient, right? Then there's another rumor in regards to this smuggling that even the basic intelligence officers were not aware of these operations. There is an intelligence agency in Sweden called KSI, or Office of Special Acquisition, and everything about them is strictly confidential. They are a closed organization and you don't even know who their manager is. So if that's that kind of level of secrecy, then it would kind of justify. But then again, it's not fair towards the people who are suffering, who would love to bury their relatives who are still down there just because some kind of organizations decided to smuggle and it's so top secret. Now back to that journalist, Mr. Davis, who had sources in MI6. He said that those sources told him that on that night, actually, there was military equipment on MS Estonia, which would justify the secrecy. And also he said that the source had informed him that the military equipment that was smuggled on MS Estonia on that night was related to Russian missile program and contained some electronic parts connected to this program. But there was more than that. There were also some witnesses among the passengers who actually survived this disaster. And one of them came forward in an interview recalling that once she understood that MS Estonia is leaving the port a little bit later, as I said at the beginning, it left the port around 15 minutes later than it was planned. She decided that she's gonna go out of her cabin, go up on the main deck, and just wave goodbye to her dad. And this is when she started to kind of look also towards the car parking area, and there she saw a military cargo car that was also escorted, and she thought that it's kind of odd, but she did recognize it as military because it has all the military green like colors. It was literally military things that were transported on MS Estonia. But then after 10 years, when this customs man comes out with this information about the smuggling and all of this broke out, she kind of put the pieces together. And now she understood that she probably is one of the witnesses who saw these cars actually be placed on MS Estonia. Now fast forward to year 2019, Henrik Evertsson, Swedish journalist, decided to take things in his own hands and go down there and check what's happening with MS Estonia and see if there's another hole and whatever is there. So on that year, he creates a specific crew in Germany. He takes a German boat called Fritz Reuter, and from Rostock, together with his team, he goes to this location where MS Estonia's wreck is located. He wants to dive down there with a robot and check everything in very specific details so that he has the proof, so that he can finally end up these rumors and conspiracies. And he also knows that there is this agreement among these Baltic countries and the UK that it's forbidden to dive there, but he goes under the flag of Germany, and as I mentioned, Germany is not part of that agreement, so technically they can do that. Now, once they get to the place where MS Estonia's wreck is located, what they see is that there is a Finnish Coast Guard ship standing exactly on the top where MS Estonia is, kind of blocking the passage for them to dive. So, of course, they are contacted by the Coast Guard saying that, you know, the usual thing, it's a graveyard, it's forbidden under this agreement to dive down there, to which the German captain of this ship where Evertsson is replies that he's a German citizen, the ship is under German flag, and technically he's not part of the agreement, so he can do that. To this, the Coast Guard asks the question, do you have any Swedes on your ship? And the German captain says, yes, I have 2 Swedes, and that's it. And they are allowed to do the dive. Quite weird, right? Yeah, it is, and we will get to that. So they are preparing to do their dive with the robot, but all this time they are observed by Finnish Coast Guard, which makes it a little bit awkward. So, is there a hole or not? Well, in short, yes. Down there, the robot makes a huge discovery, and it's all documented in a video. They found a large amount of damage on the ship. There are no questions or speculations. There is a damage. After they are done filming down under the MS Estonia wreck, a total circus starts. They are surrounded by helicopters and planes, and the Coast Guard again bombards them with the messages, please leave this area immediately, etc., etc. It gets really tight there. The national media starts to talk about German flagged ship that is basically violating MS Estonia's grave, and they're pushing forward this narrative that the people who did this should be punished because they're like breaking a law. And they also tell the fact that on this German ship there are 2 Swedish citizens who are basically like representing the country under the agreement that has promised not to dive down there, so they are breaking the law. Oh my god, they're bad people, they should be punished. And that's probably why the Finnish Coast Guard was asking to the German captain, do you have any Swedish citizens on board? Both Swedes, including Evertsson, were now charged with violating Estonia's graveyard. On the same night, the Ministry of Justice of Sweden comes out with a press release that the government opposes a new independent research. Same night. So how I see this situation is that, okay, they allowed them to dive knowing that they're gonna film something that's gonna prove that there was some shady stuff happening that night when MS Estonia sunk, but they prepared themselves to like make those people who dived there look bad. They asked whether they're Swedish citizens, so they immediately probably created a press release about two bad Swedish people who were violating Estonia's grave. They also immediately had this press conference that they will not do any other investigation. There will not be any independent investigations allowed. Like, they created everything around so that the evidence that they will get down there will not even be considered as valid. So, but Evertsson did not stop, even though he was now like public enemy number one. He contacted a person whose name was Linus Andersson, and he was like a leading expert into investigating damages of shipwrecks. So Evertsson showed him his video of the hole that he found there and the damage around this. And Mr. Andersson confirmed that yes, there is a hole and there has been a damage to the ship. He created a 3D model to understand the size and placement of this damage on the ship, and it appears it would be around 4 meters long. The location is basically where people have their cabins where they would sleep. So whatever happened there, they didn't even think about the people on the ship, whether it was like a targeted explosion or anything. It was done somewhere allegedly where the people were sleeping. So from the videos it could be concluded that it was an impact damage, as if a force had smashed it. And remember, we already talked that there is a possibility that there was some smuggled military equipment, possibly also explosives on board, and people heard a bang. So I'm just saying. Evertsson also contacted a Norwegian expert from Bergen, Frank Boresen. He had seen lots of explosions of ships, so he was the expert. He is a captain of military ship and deals with diving operations. And he compared this hole to other explosions in the ships that he had seen. And he noticed that the metal around this hole is bent inwards, which means that it came from whatever kind of impact came, it came from out. So it came in and then the metal was bent inside. If it had come from the inside, then the metal would have been bent outwards, if you know what I mean. So this means that probably the option of the explosion coming from inside of the ship can be excluded. Something must have hit MS Estonia from outside rather than inside. Of course, this expert, Mr. Boresen, did not exclude the occurrence of explosion, but he said that this probably was not the case here. And I quote,
"The metal is not bent enough for there to be an explosion. Based on the images and graphics, it appears that an external force has been pressed into the hull side. The location of the damage is located right by the waterline. Given the location, the ship may have been hit by another object."
So, was there an attack, or was it like an accident where the ship bumped with something else? But what can you bump into in the middle of a sea? Well, this story actually kind of goes very well together with another witness, another survivor of this disaster. This brings me to a survivor whose name is Karl Erik Rintam. So he was one of the survivors who said that after all of this started on the ship, he went on the deck just to kind of take a look what's happening in the sea. And this is when he saw something in the water that was around quite many meters long. That thing, according to him, was moving. He was no expert in submarines or anything. He didn't know how they look in real life into the waters. But he did assume that that might be the thing into which MS Estonia accidentally bumped into. Can this be real? I don't know. Sounds far-fetched, but then again, there was this warning alleged warning by Russia that stop smuggling or else? Or was it some kind of failure of a submarine in the area in training, for example, and it accidentally bumped into MS Estonia? Some experts estimated that submarines weigh around 1,000 tons. Seems like a good impact from outside to create the damage on MS Estonia's side. And after all of this, you might think a new investigation should be carried out. No. When Evertson put together all of the evidence that he had collected and presented it to Estonian government to kind of initiate a new investigation, the result was that the government representatives were like, yeah, we do understand, we see these things, but I'm no expert now to say that, yes, this is a very crucial evidence that should initiate new investigation. And we also have to understand that we are under this agreement and we cannot actually go down there. Again, what a safe decision they made in the year 1995 with that agreement. It just basically makes them without any power. Like, we cannot do anything. Even if you show us exact picture of a hole and all the evidence, we cannot go there. I'm so sorry, everything's closed. That's all. What about Swedish government? Evertson came with the results also to Swedish government and they said, no, thank you. We are not interested. The result was that Evertson was now accused of messing up the graveyard. For that, he could get up to 2 years in prison. But in the year 2022, he and the other Swede on the German ship with him were convicted with daily fines. It's like money to pay depending on the income as a punishment. In the year 2023, a Swedish television created a documentary about Evertson and his findings, basically saying that he falsified everything and that his narrative cannot be considered valid and just making him a villain. All in all, the survivors and also the people who lost their relatives, loved ones, and friends on the ship never really get the real answers, never really get the bodies to properly bury them and mourn them. So everything stays like it is. The official investigation that said that Bo Weiser is to blame remains the only official thing that made MS Estonia sink. However, there's so much to it that still had to be looked into, and I think you also have the same feeling that something's fishy there and something more is hidden beneath the Baltic Sea where the shipwreck of MS Estonia lies. That will be all, my friends. It was a very long video. It was a long research. Actually, I feel a little bit tired after all of this, so do appreciate my work with your likes. Leave a comment and please, please, please let me know what you think about this story. And also tell me if you've heard about it and which theory do you believe the most. What was the reason why MS Estonia sank? That being said, thank you so much for watching today's video. I'm going on a little vacation to my home country, Latvia. So I don't think that the next video is coming so soon, but I'm gonna try. So I hope you have a lovely day. Stay patient. You know, my stories now have started to take more time, but they are a lot deeper dives than before. And I kind of enjoy it. That being said, if you want to support me, make sure you have subscribed. And of course, I have Patreon, the link down there. I would be very happy to receive any kind of appraisal, even it's like a simple comment, Gita, you're doing a good job. It makes me smile and I'm just a happy person then. And I hope you noticed my t-shirt with the lighthouse. It's for you, my lighthousers. I love you. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.